The morning sun painted golden stripes across the polished oak floors of courtroom 237. Judge William Barrett settled into his leather chair, the same one he'd occupied for 15 years, absently adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the day's docket. His chambers felt particularly warm this September morning, and he loosened his black robes slightly at the neck. Another Monday, another parade of excuses, he muttered to himself, a habit he'd developed over years of solitary morning reviews. The judge took pride in his efficiency. His colleagues often joked that he could process a minor offense faster than most people could order coffee. His clerk, Sarah Chen, placed a fresh cup of coffee on his desk. Black, no sugar, just as he'd taken it for the past decade. The aroma of dark roast mingled with the familiar scent of old law books and furniture polish that perpetually lingered in his chambers. "Interesting morning ahead, Your Honor," Sarah commented, her voice carrying a hint of something that made the judge look up from his papers. She had been his clerk for 3 years, and he'd learned to read the subtle variations in her tone. "Something I should know about, Sarah?" he asked, reaching for the coffee. "Just the usual mix, but—" She hesitated, shuffling through some papers. "There's a parking citation that might be worth paying special attention to." Judge Barrett waved his hand dismissively. "A parking ticket is a parking ticket. Section C, Ordinance 15-47. Either they paid it or they didn't. Not much room for creative interpretation there." Sarah opened her mouth as if to say more, then thought better of it. "Of course, Your Honor," she replied, turning to leave. The judge noticed she'd left the case file for this supposedly interesting parking citation on top of his stack. He glanced at the name. Henderson, M. The citation was for exceeding meter time by 30 minutes outside the International Center. The fine was modest, $50 if paid immediately, $250 if contested and found valid. He noted the defendant had chosen to contest rather than pay immediately. "Time waster," he murmured, making a note to himself. In his experience, people who contested parking tickets usually came armed with elaborate excuses that rarely justified the court's time. Through his window, he could see the city coming to life. Minneapolis was beautiful this time of year, the trees just beginning to hint at their autumn colors. Construction crews were already at work on the new wing of the courthouse, their machinery providing a distant backdrop of progress. Judge Barrett stood, stretching his back. At 58, he felt every hour spent in that chair, though he'd never admit it. His wall of achievements caught his eye: diplomas, certificates, awards for judicial excellence. He'd earned every one through strict adherence to the law and efficient administration of justice. The morning light caught a newer addition to his wall: a certificate of completion from a judicial modernization seminar he'd attended last month. He'd gone reluctantly, at the chief judge's insistence, and had spent most of the time thinking about his backlog of cases. "Modern problems require modern solutions," the presenter had said. Barrett had resisted the urge to point out that most problems in his courtroom were neither modern nor particularly complex. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. 10 minutes, Your Honor," Sarah called out. He gathered his robes around him more formally, checked his appearance in the small mirror by the door, and took a final sip of coffee. The morning docket awaited, starting with this Henderson parking case that Sarah found so intriguing. "Let's get this show on the road," he said to his reflection, straightening his back and adopting the stern expression he'd perfected over years on the bench. As he reached for his gavel, he had no idea that this ordinary Monday was about to become one of the most memorable days of his judicial career. Dr. Maya Henderson's heels clicked purposefully against the courthouse's marble floors as she hurried through security. Her phone buzzed again, the third time in 10 minutes. The message preview showed URGNT, Bangkok Medical Team. But it would have to wait. The irony wasn't lost on her that after 2 decades of managing international crises, a parking ticket had finally forced her to press pause on her work. She checked her watch, a simple timepiece, a gift from refugee children in Sudan. 7 minutes until her hearing. Her fingers brushed against the worn leather briefcase her father had given her upon completing medical school. For carrying dreams, he'd said. Today, it contained research papers she'd been reviewing before dawn. Breakthrough findings on a new treatment protocol that could save thousands of lives. The morning's video call with her team in Thailand had run longer than expected. They'd finally made progress on a challenging case involving a new strain of disease affecting children in remote villages. Dr. Henderson had been coordinating efforts between medical teams across 3 continents, working to synthesize their findings into an actionable treatment plan. "Excuse me," a young intern called out, running to catch up with her. "Dr. Henderson, I'm Jamie from the World Health Organization Liaison Office. I know you're busy, but walk with me," Maya offered warmly, maintaining her pace. Despite her rushed schedule, she never turned away someone seeking help. It was a principle that had guided her from her early days as a resident in Chicago to managing global health initiatives. The Thailand team sent updated results, Janie explained, matching her stride. The treatment is showing a 94% success rate in the trial group. Maya's face lit up. "That's better than we hoped for." She stopped briefly, pulling out her tablet to scan the graphs Jamie showed her. The data confirmed what they'd theorized. Their new approach was working. The courthouse clock chimed, startling them both. 3 minutes left. "Send everything to my secure server," Maya instructed, returning to her quick pace. "I'll review it as soon as I'm done here." She couldn't help but smile at the situation. Here she was, rushing to address a parking ticket, while potentially life-changing medical data waited in her inbox. The elevator doors opened to reveal a packed car. Several people moved to make room, but Maya gestured for them to go ahead. "I'll take the stairs," she said, already pushing through the stairwell door. 2 flights up, her phone buzzed again. This time it was her daughter Sophie, a second-year medical student. "Mom, did you see the news? They're announcing the Nobel nominations today." "Sweetheart, I'm heading into court. Can I call you back?" "But Mom, they're saying your name is." The call dropped as Maya entered the signal-dead zone of the stairwell. She made a mental note to call Sophie back, though her daughter's excited tone lingered in her mind. The Nobel Committee had contacted her months ago about her work in crisis medicine and conflict zone healthcare, but she'd kept it quiet. There were more important things to focus on than awards. Reaching the correct floor, Maya took a moment to catch her breath and straighten her charcoal gray suit, a rare departure from her usual medical attire. Her hand brushed against the small notebook in her pocket where she kept her daily reminder. Every person has a story worth hearing. Through the courtroom doors, she could hear the day's proceedings beginning. Maya quickly checked her reflection in a window, tucking back a few strands of her silver-streaked hair. At 55, she wore her age with pride. Each gray hair earned through nights spent in field hospitals and days navigating international health crises. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out her citation notice one last time. The irony of the situation brought a slight smile to her face. She'd received the ticket while providing emergency consultation to a team headed for a crisis zone. But that wouldn't be her defense. She believed in taking responsibility, even when circumstances were challenging. It was what she taught her medical students and what she practiced every day in her work. As she reached for the courtroom door, her phone lit up with another message. URGNT, Nobel Committee. Maya switched the phone to silent. Whatever news it contained would have to wait. Right now, she had a court appointment to keep. The heavy wooden doors of courtroom 237 opened with a soft creak as Dr. Henderson entered. The room fell into that peculiar kind of silence that seems to hold its breath, waiting. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor and illuminating dancing dust motes in its beam. Judge Barrett glanced up from his papers, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly as he observed the woman approaching the defendant's podium. Something about her bearing caught his attention, a quiet dignity that seemed to fill the space around her. She carried herself with the composed grace of someone accustomed to operating under pressure, though he wouldn't realize the full extent of this for another 30 minutes. Case number 2024, MT-147, parking violation on West International Drive. The clerk announced, her voice carrying a slight tremor that Judge Barrett didn't miss. He noticed Sarah, his usually composed clerk, watching the proceedings with unusual intensity. Miss Henderson, Judge Barrett began, emphasizing the honorific with practiced authority. You're here contesting a parking violation from September 3rd. The officer's notes indicate your meter expired at 2:30 p.m., and the citation was issued at 3:00 p.m. Do you dispute these facts? Dr. Henderson placed her worn leather briefcase on the podium, her movements deliberate and precise. No, Your Honor, I don't dispute the timing. Her voice carried the kind of clarity that came from years of speaking in crowded emergency rooms and international conferences, though she kept her tone respectfully measured. The judge raised an eyebrow, pencil poised over his notepad. In his experience, people who didn't dispute the facts usually didn't bother showing up to court. Then may I ask why we're here today, Miss Henderson? At that moment, a young intern burst through the courtroom doors, clutching a tablet. The bailiff moved to intercept him, but the intern whispered something urgent, pointing at Dr. Henderson. The bailiff's eyes widened, and he quickly made his way to Sarah, who was already reaching for a notepad. Meanwhile, Dr. Henderson began to explain. Your Honor, I understand that rules exist for a reason, and I take full responsibility for exceeding the meter time. However, I believe context is important. She opened her briefcase, retrieving a single document. At 2:15 p.m. that afternoon, I received an emergency call from. Judge Barrett raised his hand, cutting her off. Miss Henderson, while I appreciate your willingness to provide context, a parking violation is a straightforward matter. Either the meter was expired, or it wasn't. You've admitted it was. Whether you were shopping, at lunch, or saving the world. He paused, offering a small smile at his own joke. The ordinance applies equally. A subtle murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah was now quickly making her way to the judge's bench, note in hand, her face flushed with urgency. But before she could reach him, Dr. Henderson spoke again, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone, including the judge, pause. Your Honor, with respect, I wasn't shopping or at lunch. At 2:15 p.m., I was on an emergency video consultation with a medical team in Bangkok, coordinating a response to an outbreak that had already claimed 17 children's lives. The extra 30 minutes on that meter bought us time to establish a treatment protocol that has since saved 43 lives and counting. The note finally reached Judge Barrett's hands. As he unfolded it, Dr. Henderson continued, her voice calm but passionate. I'm not asking for special treatment, Your Honor. I'm simply providing the context you might need to make a fully informed decision. As someone who has spent their life making critical choices, I believe you understand the value of complete information. Judge Barrett's face changed as he read the note, his complexion shifting from authoritative pink to a paler shade. His eyes darted between the paper in his hands and the woman standing before him. The courtroom remained silent, the tension almost palpable as the judge slowly removed his glasses, polished them with his handkerchief, and replaced them, a gesture that gave him a moment to compose himself. The note in his hands contained 3 simple lines. World Health Organization Executive Director of Crisis Response. Nobel Peace Prize nominee. Announcement pending. Leading researcher in conflict zone medicine. The silence in courtroom 237 stretched like a finely spun thread, delicate yet unbreakable. Judge Barrett found himself staring at his own reflection in the polished surface of his desk, seeing himself as if for the first time. The weight of his earlier dismissive tone hung heavy in the air. Your Honor, Sarah whispered, leaning close to the bench. There's more. She slipped another note beside the first one. This time, the paper contained details of Dr. Henderson's recent breakthrough in developing mobile trauma units that had revolutionized emergency response in war-torn regions. The units had reduced casualty rates by 60% in areas where traditional medical facilities had been destroyed. The judge cleared his throat, buying time as his mind raced to process this new information. His years of experience had taught him how to maintain composure in any situation, but this moment felt different. He noticed details about Dr. Henderson he had overlooked before. The intelligence in her eyes, the quiet confidence in her posture, the way other people in the courtroom seemed drawn to her presence. "Dr. Henderson," he began, emphasizing her proper title this time, "please continue with your explanation." His tone had shifted, not to one of deference, but to one of genuine interest and respect. Dr. Henderson smiled warmly, surprising everyone in the courtroom. "Thank you, Your Honor, but I sense you've just received quite a bit of information about my work. Perhaps I could instead share something more relevant to today's proceedings." The judge nodded, grateful for her graceful handling of the situation. The tension in the room began to dissolve, replaced by something more contemplative. "That afternoon," she continued, "while I was addressing the medical crisis in Bangkok, I made a choice. I knew my meter was running out, but I also knew that every minute of delay in providing treatment protocols could cost lives. It was a small decision compared to the ones we make in emergency rooms, but it carried its own weight." She paused, reaching into her briefcase again. "I have here the results of that 30-minute consultation." She held up a single sheet of paper. "This morning, I received confirmation that all 43 children affected by the outbreak have fully recovered. The protocol we developed has been shared with clinics in 12 other regions facing similar challenges." Judge Barrett found himself leaning forward, engaged despite his usual detachment. "Dr. Henderson, your work is remarkable. But I find myself curious. Why did you choose to contest this ticket in person? Surely your time is—" He gestured vaguely at the stack of papers documenting her achievements. "Because principles matter, Your Honor," she replied simply. "I made a choice that day, and I'm here to accept the consequences of that choice. I believe that's how we build trust in our institutions, by showing up, by explaining ourselves, by treating every interaction with respect." The judge sat back in his chair, struck by the elegance of her response. Here was someone who had every reason to consider herself above a simple parking ticket, yet she had appeared in his courtroom not to demand special treatment, but to demonstrate respect for the very system he had devoted his life to upholding. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds outside, illuminating the space between them. In that moment, Judge Barrett realized that true justice wasn't just about applying rules blindly. It was about understanding the full context of human experience. "The court recognizes," he began, his voice carrying a new note of warmth, "that sometimes our system of justice must balance the letter of the law with its spirit." He paused, looking directly at Dr. Henderson. "Would you be willing to share with this court more about your work? Not as a defendant, but as someone who clearly has much to teach us about service and decision-making under pressure." The transformation in the courtroom was palpable. What had begun as a routine parking violation hearing had become something else entirely. A moment of genuine human connection and understanding. The afternoon sun now filled courtroom 237, transforming the austere space into something warmer and more intimate. Dr. Henderson stood at the podium, her presence commanding yet gentle as she shared stories from her decades of humanitarian work. "In emergency medicine," she explained, "we often say that the first 5 minutes determine everything. But what we rarely discuss is how those critical moments are shaped by the thousands of small decisions that came before them." Her words carried the weight of experience, not theory. Judge Barrett had abandoned his usual strict posture, leaning forward with genuine interest. The entire courtroom sat spellbound as Dr. Henderson described establishing emergency medical centers in regions others had deemed unreachable. "Last month," she continued, "we launched a program training local healthcare workers in remote villages. These individuals might never hold a medical degree, but they save lives every day through their dedication and understanding of their communities." Sarah, the clerk, was rapidly taking notes, not for the court record, but for herself. The bailiff had moved closer, drawn in by the narrative. Even the usual shuffle of people entering and leaving the courtroom had stilled. "When we design our mobile trauma units," Dr. Henderson explained, pulling out a simple diagram, "we focus on what's essential. Every piece of equipment, every protocol, every decision must serve the ultimate goal, preserving life and dignity." Judge Barrett found himself nodding, recognizing parallels to his own work. "You're describing a balance," he observed, "between rigid protocols and human needs, something we struggle with in the legal system as well." Dr. Henderson's eyes lit up at the connection. "Exactly, Your Honor. In crisis medicine, we have strict protocols, but we also know that every situation is unique. The challenge lies in knowing when to adapt while maintaining the integrity of our standards." A phone buzzed quietly in the courtroom. The young intern who had burst in earlier was reading a message, his eyes growing wide. He quickly scribbled a note and passed it forward through the gallery. As the note made its way to Sarah, Dr. Henderson continued, "I've learned that the greatest breakthroughs often come from listening to perspectives we might have initially dismissed. Every person." "Dr. Henderson," Sarah interrupted, her voice trembling slightly as she held the new note. "I apologize for the interruption." But she looked to Judge Barrett, who nodded his permission. "The Nobel Committee has just announced their decision," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Dr. Maya Henderson has been awarded the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize for her revolutionary work in crisis medicine and humanitarian response." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Dr. Henderson closed her eyes briefly, accepting the news with characteristic grace. When she opened them, they glistened with tears she didn't try to hide. Judge Barrett rose from his bench, an unusual break in protocol that felt absolutely right in the moment. "Dr. Henderson," he said, his own voice thick with emotion, "I believe this court owes you an apology. We came dangerously close to missing an opportunity to learn from your wisdom today." She shook her head gently. "Your Honor, no apology is necessary. This morning has reminded me why I do the work I do. Whether in medicine or law, we're all trying to serve humanity. Sometimes we just need moments like this to remind us of our common purpose." The judge looked down at the original parking citation, now seeming impossibly small and insignificant. Yet it had led to this moment, this transformation. He realized that sometimes the smallest cases could teach the biggest lessons. "Did you know," he asked quietly, "about the Nobel Prize when you came in today?" Dr. Henderson smiled warmly. "I knew I was nominated, but that wasn't important to me. What mattered was being here, participating in the process, showing respect for our institutions, while engaging in meaningful dialogue about how we can make them better." The news of Dr. Henderson's Nobel Prize spread through the courthouse like a gentle wave, transforming the usual Monday morning atmosphere into something extraordinary. Judge Barrett's courtroom, typically cleared after each case, remained full as people lingered, drawn to the remarkable events unfolding before them. "Dr. Henderson," the judge began, removing his reading glasses and placing them carefully on his desk, "I'd like to share something with you." His voice carried a new quality, one of openness that surprised even his longtime staff. "Before becoming a judge, I spent a year with Doctors Without Borders as their legal advisor," he revealed. "I saw dedicated medical professionals like yourself working in conditions I couldn't imagine. Yet somewhere along the way, I let myself forget those lessons." Dr. Henderson's expression softened with recognition. "The Rwanda crisis of '94, she asked quietly. The judge's eyes widened. "Yes, how did you?" "I remember a young lawyer who helped us navigate local authorities to set up emergency clinics," she smiled. "You wore wire-rimmed glasses even then." The courtroom fell silent as the two professionals shared a moment of unexpected connection. Sarah, the clerk, watched in amazement as years of formality seemed to melt away from her usually stern employer. "That experience should have made me a better judge," Barrett admitted, his voice carrying a hint of regret. Instead, I let myself become focused on rules rather than reasons, on procedures rather than people. Dr. Henderson stepped closer to the bench, her presence radiating warmth. Your Honor, may I suggest that you're being too hard on yourself. The rules and procedures you uphold are vital. They're like the protocols we use in medicine. They create a framework for fairness and consistency. The judge nodded thoughtfully. But like your medical protocols, they shouldn't be rigid to the point of losing their purpose. He straightened in his chair, making a decision, which is why I'd like to propose something, if you're willing. He turned to address the entire courtroom, his voice carrying the authority of his position, but now tempered with newfound wisdom. Today has reminded me that justice isn't just about applying laws. It's about understanding the contexts in which those laws operate. Dr. Henderson watched with interest as Judge Barrett pulled out a fresh legal pad and began writing. I'm establishing a new program in this courthouse, he announced. Once a month, we'll invite professionals from different fields, medicine, education, social work, to share their perspectives on how our legal decisions impact their work in the community. The energy in the room shifted as people realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Sarah was already making notes, her face glowing with enthusiasm for the new initiative. Dr. Henderson, the judge continued, would you consider being our first speaker? Not today. You clearly have some Nobel Prize business to attend to. A warm chuckle rippled through the courtroom. But perhaps next month. I would be honored, she replied sincerely. Though I suggest we include voices from all levels of community service. Sometimes the most profound insights come from unexpected sources. Judge Barrett smiled, remembering the young medical workers she had mentioned training in remote villages. Agreed. Sarah, please make a note. We'll create a diverse advisory panel to help structure this program. He picked up his gavel, pausing before bringing it down. As for the matter that brought us here today, he looked at the parking ticket, then back at Dr. Henderson. The court finds that while the letter of the law was technically violated, the spirit of public service was upheld in the highest order. The gavel fell gently. Case dismissed. And Dr. Henderson, congratulations on the Nobel Prize. The world is better for your work. As Dr. Henderson gathered her belongings, people began approaching her with handshakes and congratulations, but she paused at the podium, turning back to the judge. Your Honor, thank you for showing that wisdom can flow in both directions. 1 month after the memorable courtroom encounter, the Minneapolis County Courthouse's largest conference room buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, with people lining the walls and spilling into the hallway. Judge Barrett stood at the podium, surveying the diverse crowd that had gathered for the first Community Justice Dialogue series. When I began my career, he addressed the assembly. I believed justice was simple, black and white, right and wrong. Today, I understand that true justice requires us to see the full spectrum of human experience. He smiled, adjusting those familiar wire-rimmed glasses, and it took a parking ticket to teach me that lesson. Warm laughter rippled through the room. In the front row, Dr. Henderson sat beside a mix of community leaders, teachers, social workers, small business owners, and local activists. Despite her increasingly busy schedule following the Nobel Prize announcement, she had kept her promise to help launch this initiative. Our first monthly dialogue series has drawn more interest than we anticipated, the judge continued, gesturing to the overflow crowd. We've had to arrange simultaneous broadcasts in 3 other courtrooms. He paused, letting that sink in. It seems I wasn't the only one ready for this conversation. Sarah, now the program's coordinator alongside her clerk duties, stepped forward with a thick stack of papers. We've received over 200 proposals for future sessions, she announced proudly. From emergency responders sharing how legal decisions affect their ability to save lives, to teachers explaining how truancy laws impact struggling families. The judge nodded appreciatively. But before we look forward, I'd like to share something that happened yesterday. He pulled out a letter from his pocket. A young lawyer approached me about a case. Instead of simply citing precedents, she asked me to consider the broader impact of our decision on the community. That might not sound revolutionary, but in this courthouse, it represents a significant shift in how we approach justice. Dr. Henderson rose to join him at the podium, her presence as commanding yet gentle as ever. Change, she began, often comes from unexpected moments. In medicine, we learn that healing isn't just about treating symptoms. It's about understanding the whole person. The same principle applies to justice. The room fell silent as she continued. Last week, I met a young man in the courthouse lobby. He told me he'd been dreading his court appearance, feeling that no one would understand his circumstances. But he'd heard about what happened in this courthouse, about a judge and a parking ticket. She smiled at Barrett. That story gave him hope that he would be seen as a person, not just a case number. Judge Barrett stepped forward again. Which brings us to today's announcement. The County Board has unanimously approved funding for what we're calling the Comprehensive Justice Initiative. This program will provide training for all courthouse staff, from judges to security personnel, focusing on understanding the complex realities of the communities we serve. Applause filled the room, but the judge raised his hand for silence. There's more. Dr. Henderson's foundation has offered to partner with us, bringing their expertise in crisis response and community engagement. Together, we'll create a model that other courthouses can adopt. Dr. Henderson beamed as she added, because justice, like medicine, should never stop evolving, never stop learning, and never stop seeing the humanity in every person who walks through these doors. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd. In that light, you could see tears in some eyes, hope in others, and in all faces, the sense that they were witnessing something truly meaningful. Last month, Judge Barrett concluded, I almost missed an opportunity to learn from someone extraordinary because I was too focused on procedure to see the bigger picture. Today, we ensure that doesn't happen again. Today, we begin a new chapter in how justice is served in this courthouse. 1 year later, Judge Barrett stood at his chamber window, watching the morning sun illuminate the newly installed plaque on the courthouse plaza. Justice sees the whole story. Community Justice Center. The morning light caught the polished surface, creating a warm glow that seemed to symbolize the transformation that had taken place over the past year. His desk, once dominated by law books, now held a balanced collection of legal texts and community impact studies. A framed photo showed him and Dr. Henderson at the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony in Oslo, where he'd been honored to introduce her speech about bridging gaps between institutions and communities. Sarah knocked on his door, entering with the morning's reports. The numbers are in from the first year of the Comprehensive Justice Initiative, she announced, unable to contain her smile. Complaint rates down 60%, community participation up 300%, and, she paused for effect, 8 other courthouses across the country have adopted our model. The judge picked up one of the reports, noting the familiar parking ticket that started it all, now preserved under glass on his desk. And our special guest is confirmed for today. Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Henderson's flight landed an hour ago. She wouldn't miss this for anything. Outside, people were already gathering for the first anniversary celebration of the Community Justice Dialogue series. The small program they'd started had blossomed into something remarkable. Monthly sessions had become weekly ones, then daily opportunities for community members to share their perspectives with the court. The main courtroom had been renovated, its imposing bench replaced with a more accessible circular arrangement that encouraged dialogue. Yet it maintained its dignity, proof that accessibility and authority could coexist. Judge Barrett adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, now a symbol of both his past and his evolution. Did you know, he shared with Sarah, that yesterday, a judge in Atlanta dismissed a parking ticket because the defendant was delivering emergency medical supplies. They cited our case as precedent. Sarah nodded. The Henderson principle, she said. That's what they're calling it in law schools now. The idea that justice must consider the broader context of human service. They made their way to the ceremony, where hundreds had gathered despite the early hour. Dr. Henderson stood near the podium, somehow looking more energized despite her even busier schedule. The Nobel Prize had amplified her ability to create change, and she'd used that platform to advocate for more human-centered institutions worldwide. 1 year ago, Judge Barrett began his address. A parking ticket taught me more about justice than 30 years on the bench. But the real lesson wasn't about parking at all. It was about the danger of letting rules blind us to reality. He gestured to the diverse crowd. Look around. Every person here has a story that matters. Every case that comes before this court represents a human life, filled with complexities we must strive to understand. Dr. Henderson joined him at the podium. And every institution, she added, has the capacity to evolve, to become more compassionate while maintaining its integrity. Together, they unveiled the courthouse's new mission statement: justice through understanding, progress through partnership. Simple words that represented a profound shift in how the legal system engaged with the community it served. As the ceremony concluded, a young lawyer approached Judge Barrett with tears in her eyes. "Your Honor," she said, "I was here that day, watching from the back of the courtroom. It inspired me to become a lawyer. Today, I handle cases in your court, and every time I enter, I remember that morning." The judge smiled, remembering his own transformation. "The most powerful changes," he replied, "often begin with the smallest moments of understanding." Dr. Henderson, overhearing, added warmly, "And sometimes, a simple parking ticket can change the world." As the morning sun rose higher, its light seemed to embrace the gathered community. Judges, lawyers, citizens, all connected by the understanding that true justice begins with seeing each other's humanity. The parking ticket that started it all remained under glass, a humble reminder that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places.